And for GSK, actually, 57% of our greenhouse gas emissions are actually coming from patient use of asthma inhalers. So we have over 50% of our scope 3 is sitting in a medicine, and it's the propellant actually in that asthma inhaler that has the very high global warming potential product. So one of the biggest projects, and you can hear it in the numbers with the over 50%, was to how do we change that medicine to reduce its environmental footprint. And for those that aren't in the medicines sector or a regulated sector, just changing a product is not a simple thing to do. Rightfully so. All of the products for companies like this are fully regulated and have to go through trials and tests. And so to change, just to give you a concept of changing a medicine like that, we're talking over 5 years just to get the change going through.
Hello and welcome to the CSO Impact Podcast, where we talk to leaders in sustainability. I'm your host, Harald Neidhardt, and we're talking to leaders in across Europe, across global companies. And today I'm really proud to announce Claire Lund, and welcome to the studio. She is Vice President of Environmental Sustainability at GSK. And she's also the gold winner of the CSO Award Europe that we hosted in Davos in January. Congratulations, Claire. Welcome to the show. And congratulations again for being selected as the Gold Award winner from across the top 100 CSOs in Europe.
Thank you, Harold. And yes, it was, I think I'm still in a little bit of shock, but I am clearly very proud of my award because I'm proudly displaying it in my office. But yeah, thank you and to the team for the recognition. But actually, I think I said in the speech when I was there, it was also a proud moment to be in the room with so many incredible CSOs and other teams and partners as well, because we may not have the same title, but we're all, and what I loved was the passion and the power in that room is all driving towards positive impact for people and for planet. And so it was just a humbling moment actually to be in the same room as well. So thank you very much. And I also think it's brilliant what you do.
Thank you so much. But yeah, I think, again, it was so brilliant to see you really surprised, the really Oscar moment. You didn't know it before. And
No.
So that was really still gives me goosebumps. You know, that's exactly what we like to, put together, having the perfect people in the room, and everybody is a winner already. But then, whoever is really on stage. And I think what we try with the awards is obviously that we have all the quantitative data, but then we have also our grand jury who can, push for the last, final vote, basically. So there's a human factor in voting you as the humans in these big, corporate machines and leading as a chief sustainability officer or in different titles, as you say, environmental. But let's learn about the company a little bit. Share what is GSK, maybe what's some of the challenges in the industry to kick us off, to give us a frame of reference of your daily work.
Yeah, thank you. And it's probably worth explaining who GSK is for those that don't know. So it's a global biopharma company with, frankly, a single purpose to get ahead of disease together, uniting science, talent and technology. And positively impacting the lives of over 2.5 billion people. We make medicines and vaccines, and we have over 37 manufacturing sites globally, 70,000 employees. We supply medicines and vaccines to well over 75 countries. So it is a truly global company. And I have the absolute pleasure to lead on the environmental sustainability strategy and execution towards those targets as well. So that's GSK.
And tell us a little bit about the role in maybe some of the initiatives that you are involved in right now.
Yeah, so I joined GSK actually probably about 13 years ago, and came in through actually procurement routes. So I've always been in energy and environmental sustainability, whether it's through procurement or whether it's through strategy, and had frankly the joy of coming into GSK to look at, well, what could we achieve as a global biopharma company in the environmental sustainability arena? So back in 2020, actually, one of my first roles was to set new ambitious targets for the organization. And at the time, and we're probably going to talk about this, 2019, 2020, well, apart from the COVID pandemic, which was clearly a very, very strong health determining factor that was happening in the world, the connection of climate and nature was also happening very, very powerfully. So it was a very sort of interesting time where climate, health, and nature were actually colliding as topics, and almost consciously colliding as topics in people's minds. So it gave me and the company a platform to look at, well, what should our ambition be as a responsible business? So we did a lot of work, and part of my role was to really look at what is the right approach, what is the right strategy for us, where can we impact, where can we influence. So we set up both a climate and a nature goal back in 2020. And I think one of the few companies to really put nature on an equal footing with climate. So the net zero targets for climate, but also contributing to a nature positive world was literally brought in as a twin goal. And it was, I'll be honest, probably quite a terrifying moment for not just me, but the company and the stakeholders that really supported that goal, because climate had a slightly more understood trajectory and challenge, and obviously a common language around greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide. Whereas nature was still seen as well, how do you quantify? How do you make sure you're driving towards the right actions? Have we got the right plan in place for execution and deliver? So I think it was, frankly, a leap of faith, trust, to go to put it on an equal footing as climate as well. So that was where we sort of set up the targets and the goals, and certainly happy to talk about those. But it was great that the company, the culture, wanted to take that leap, because, like I said, at the time, nobody else was really setting nature targets. So it was a great, scary opportunity.
Yes. Fantastic. I mean, because it's very pioneering. You're really, it's a kind of a moonshot for the industry, possibly being the first and say, well, we're going to do it, and define even what it is, or set some targets. Maybe we dive in just after, let's say, well, I already have 3 follow-up questions, but why don't we start with, if these are setting the targets, can you tell us maybe 1 or 2 initiatives which come out of it? And then we kind of, we circle around these topics a little bit more.
Yeah, of course. And it's a huge topic and a huge area. So where, I suppose, on the climate side, so I'll focus on that one first. For GSK, actually, we looked at, I think like every company does, what's your scope 1, 2, 3 footprint? So where are our climate hotspots in our own value chain? And for GSK, actually, 57% of our greenhouse gas emissions are actually coming from patient use of asthma inhalers. So we have over 50% of our scope 3 is sitting in a medicine, and it's the propellant actually in that asthma inhaler that has the very high global warming potential. And then we've got the sort of standard challenges of operational sites, heat, electricity, and then of course suppliers as well with those pieces. So for us, the focus was very much on, well, what do we need to do about changing that product? So one of the biggest projects, and you can hear it in the numbers with the over 50%, was to how do we change that medicine to reduce its environmental footprint. And for those that aren't in the medicines sector or a regulated sector, just changing a product is not a simple thing to do. Rightfully so.
And it's costly, right?
And costly and challenging and not guaranteed, because it's fundamentally, it still has to be a medicine that works. So it's all about then going through the trials.
Tell us a little bit, what is the propellant? It's not a propeller, but it's a propellant. No. So it's an aerosol, right? Which makes maybe the medicine fly, or?
Yes, it's an inert gas which helps get the medicine into the lungs. So it, in a word, it propels the medicine into the lungs to get it. So it isn't the active ingredient. It isn't actually the medicine itself. But of course, all of the products for companies like this are fully regulated and have to go through trials and tests. And so to change, just to give you a concept of changing a medicine like that, we're talking over 5 years just to get the sort of the change going through. And again, I will stress, rightfully so, quality, efficacy are absolutely critical. And we then need to work with different regulators in different countries. So it's not just one regulator, it's multiple regulators in multiple countries. A global supply chain needs to be set up. We need to industrialize. We need to make sure the supply chain, the suppliers are there as well. So it is not a small feat. But I guess for us as an organization, we couldn't have a credible climate goal without addressing that. Yeah. So the biggest project I think we've got on the books is that one. Sorry?
So are we at the end of the 5 years, or are we at year 3 and you're still in the journey?
We're still on the journey. So I won't bore everybody with the phases of clinical development for medicines, but we're in human trials at the moment. So we're aiming for, as soon as we can, frankly, but I think part of it is the challenges around the external environment, around regulators, supply chains. And frankly, I will come back to it has got to be a medicine that is still working.
Yeah, of course.
So yes, we're on the journey, and I think that is one of the largest projects we've got. Certainly, when we talk about volume of impact for greenhouse gas emissions, so that's the climate project which we are watching extremely closely and active. But we've also got projects, of course, in working with suppliers. So very similar cross, I think, sector challenges to everybody else that's got a Scope 3 target around how do we decarbonize the suppliers and the supply chain from, tier 1 suppliers to tier N suppliers, and you decarbonize across the board. So we're also still facing the same challenges in that space. And that's where actually we're working really well with our peers through various collaborative initiatives to really come together to set up frameworks for suppliers for things like renewable electricity, power purchase agreements. We're looking at heat now as well as a sort of how do we sort of collectively work on that problem across the supply chain. And again, I think it's one of those ones where certain aspects we can work on our own. I say on our own. So the propellant in the inhalers is definitely for us to work on. We need a lot of people to work on it, but that's for us. Working with suppliers and mutual supply chains is exactly where collective collaborative action really, really does need to come in and work. So those are some of the big programs in the climate space, and we can talk about nature as well.
Yeah, nature. Okay, one more question and then nature.
Yes.
So if I think about the inhaler, so you also have plastic, right? So the whole thing which you use is a very fossil fuel kind of product. Is there ways to do that in a different way, or use recycled plastic, or come to a different packaging of the main ingredient?
It's interesting because and it's often sort of a bit of a challenge when you look at the actual footprint. Way over 90% is the propellant, and I think and this is an interesting challenge. And I think one of the questions you had in the briefing previously was sort of what are some of the challenges with CSOs is wanting to go after absolutely everything, particularly the things that people can see and touch, but prioritizing and being firm for impact. And those two things often collide. Are we focusing on the most material impact for the environment? Yes, that is the propellant. Are there other things that people see and feel and to look at? Yes. But which ones do we prioritize and which ones do we really double down on for impact? Because there are take-back schemes, there are opportunities to look at different packaging, but you're adding another 5 to 8 years just to look at that.
So, okay, first things first, then it trickles down. Okay.
It is, and it is actually the challenge I think most people face, and I certainly face it as well, is everybody wants you to work on the things they can see and touch. And I think the challenge we've had, and maybe some of the industries had, is greenhouse gas emissions. You can't see them. You can't touch them. You can't see the impact, unless you're sitting on the front line of climate change. And actually really driving for impact is, I think, part of our challenge. And it's not that plastic or packaging is not important. We are still working on those solutions as well, but it really is prioritizing for impact. I think is the critical task, because I absolutely want to drive everything all at once, of course, but there is a reality.
Fascinating. And let's go to the nature part. So how did it come about that you said, all right, in 2020 or 19 and 20, you wanted to set both of these goals and targets and get onto that journey, even being, let's say, without guardrails from other industries or other maybe people in your industry. How did nature already so early, relatively speaking, come into play?
Well, I think fundamentally as a science-based company, it helps when you ground a lot of the sort of reality of what we should be focusing on in science. So we looked again at, well, what's the impact of climate change? And, nature loss, degradation are fundamental drivers or impacts of climate change. They're also fundamental impacts of negative human health. So again, coming back to when I said at the beginning, we were looking at sort of what's the health dimension across here as well. Deforestation really does potentially exacerbate respiratory disease. You've got zoonotic transfers potentially of disease as well. And of course, a lot of those examples were coming through at that time as well. So actually, nature loss, nature degradation was critical both on a health impact pillar, but also it's sort of the other side of the coin on climate change. It can either be its brilliant best friend in terms of nature could actually support the reduction and the mitigation of climate change, but if you also get it wrong, it will make it even worse. So whether that's water scarcity or whether it's deforestation. So you've got the sort of the two sides there with nature and climate, and then you bring in the health dimension, and then you ground it in a science-based company which says, how do we tackle some of this? And where should we prioritize? Where's our impact? And nature, which is also something that is, it tackles the heart as much as it does the mind, I think. So I think most people can resonate particularly well with nature, even if you can't define it. Does that make any sense? What makes you happy is often a walk in the woods or, going to see the sea or seeing mountains. And it just lifts your mental spirits as well. So there's a heart connection in the nature topic too. But then, I'll be honest, as a fundamental science-based company, we went, right, but what actions do we need to take? So we focused on water, so fresh water and oceans. And that included not only our sort of factories and suppliers' use of water, but also in water-stressed basins. What's causing that? What's the impact? The quality of water, access. So whether that's water and sanitation programs and community engagements in that space. And again, the health connection coming in there. And then also looking at the materials that we use. Are they from nature? Do they come from trees? Do they come from oceans? And some of our materials do. What are we doing about that? From two sides, resilience. Because if we can't make medicines and vaccines, that is a patient that isn't getting a treatment or a prevention. And also, how do we actually mitigate that sort of impact as well? So we can't have, just a free use of nature's environmental resources without understanding how that sort of works. So we looked again, sort of key materials that we're using in our medicines, vaccines, supply chain, and actually started to look at sustainable sourcing of those materials, but also, is there a transition away from some of those materials as well? So again, sort of picking up the avoid, reduce, restore logic around environmental sustainability. So that was sort of the nature piece. What's been happening, I would say, is it's been building. So we were one of the pilot companies working with the science-based targets for nature and had our freshwater target validated, which is really, really important. And we've continued to work with them to really make sure that the targets, the ambition, the prioritization is still grounded in the right science around what nature needs us to do. And it's been particularly important actually in the water basin concept. So we knew we had to obviously do the right thing on reducing water use in our own sites. But actually, is that enough? What else do we need to do for that water basin and that structure and that ecosystem? So it really has helped us build on that journey as we've gone through. I could talk for hours on nature, sorry.
Could you give me an example of, let's say, one of the ingredients which comes from nature? Because for me, a pharmaceutical company largely is in, let's say, artificial products and little medications that are generated in an industrial way. But what part, and there was formerly all the medicine came from nature and you industrialize it. What parts are still nature? Is there one ingredient that you say, yeah, everybody knows it and we use this, honey bee drop or a little bit of a birch tree or something? Or I don't know.
Well, probably there's two, which is really, really interesting. So one, a lot of our packaging is cardboard. That comes from trees. So paper is actually, ironically, one of our highest sourced natural materials, which people tend to, forget. But anyway, so paper and hence deforestation around paper and is a very critical one for us. Over 50% of our packaging is actually paper and card. So it is a critical piece. But you're right. Most people go straight to the medicine rather than the packaging. So I'm just going to call that one out as one that's high on the radar. The other one that may or may not be known is horseshoe crab blood. So it's the blue blood that comes from the horseshoe crab is actually an endotoxin test for the entire industry. So making sure that there are no horrible endotoxins in a medicine or a vaccine. And it is a regulated control. So one of the pieces to work on is not just reducing the use of that. So one of the things we're doing is optimizing. So I'll make up the figures just to put it into context, but rather than using 10 litres, you use half a litre. That's not the right numbers, but so there's an optimization piece, and actually we're looking at 80% reduction in the use of the material. So that's one.
Oh, wow.
The other one then is working with regulators, pharmacopoeias to actually move to the synthetic alternative. And again, that is not just the pharma industry, that is the teams, the regulators, the groups that actually need to work together to prove that the synthetic alternative is as equivalent as the horseshoe crab.
Yeah.
And the third piece that we're doing in the background is obviously making sure that is responsible and sustainable practices with the suppliers of the horseshoe crab blood as well. So there's sort of three pieces. Well, first of all, frankly, how can you completely avoid it is working through the regulatory pathways and the approvals. And we're doing that actually as an industry. So there's a pharma supply chain initiative led by us and Eli Lilly, really, really trying to drive that avoidance piece, which is the critical one. And of course, then reduce, how do you optimize? And then realistically, then it's, well, how do we make sure that what we are still using while that transition's happening is done in the most responsible way as well. So those are two materials. The second one is probably the one that is the most interesting, I would say, if you've never understood what happens for pharmaceuticals and vaccines testing.
So, I mean, this is also fascinating, and you are clearly very deep in all of the knowledge. I want to learn more about you. So how did you end up in the role, and what was your journey? Tell us a little bit.
My journey, I think, started, well, frankly, in an incredibly young age. I've always been curious about the environment, ecosystems, and whether that's because my father dragged us on walks around forests and was explaining like why moss grows on one side of the tree because it's north. I've always been curious to understand how nature, ecosystems, the environment works. That fed through, frankly, all my school life. I ended up doing geography, geology, eco-science, and then environmental science. So you could see the sort of the chain of thinking that I was just extremely, frankly, interested in and very passionate on. And I loved traveling and seeing, the impacts of nature, both positive and unfortunately negative, just to understand the consequences and the impact. So I've just frankly loved understanding it. And I understand more and more every single day. I don't think you're ever done learning, ever. So that's fantastic. Like I said, I came in through almost procurement. So my sort of first rose into environmental sustainability was actually energy. So it was actually looking at energy procurement. How can you optimize the costs of energy for companies? And of course, the first one was how do you use less, which, is never as sexy maybe as renewable electricity or some other cool topics, but actually optimizing, reducing is still the fundamental best way to reduce both your cost and environmental impact. So I came through that black procurement lens, and then, like I said, moved into the environmental sustainability topics as a primary, and it did feel to me like I was coming back home in some respects. It was great having the commercial, the procurement, the business focus and the lens, but really landing into environmental sustainability to lead environmental direction. I couldn't be prouder and happier.
It really comes back a full circle. Now, you're a global company, obviously, and how do you maybe set up your teams? You're centrally located, I guess, in the UK, and you have the 70 countries plus, and 70 sites or 75. How does let's say, how do you orchestrate the communication and the work of yourself and the team?
Yeah, and I would say one of the pieces I'm most proud of is actually how the company has really embraced the direction for environmental sustainability. And it isn't just me. It really is not just me. It takes I don't know whether it takes a village or a global company or an army. I'm not sure if any of those metaphors are very good, but it takes a lot of people with the right mindset to really drive change. And it really cannot be done by one person. So it really is about how we've set up for success across the organization. I describe it as a hub and a spoke model. So we've got the central team, which I lead in the center of the company, sort of the corporate side. Then you've got procurement have set up a sustainability team. R&D have got sustainability teams. Engineering have got a sustainability team. So there's multiple sort of, I would call them spokes then within the business that are primarily focused on sustainability. They then work, of course, with their functions or their teams and sites or suppliers across that board. So you then start to see sort of this amplification, but in the right functions or the right areas. Finance is another group that have got the hub as well. So there's fantastic sort of nodes and hubs across the business that are primarily focused on sustainability, but they then themselves then integrate that across the functions or the teams and across the board as well. So it very much one of the things I'm so pleased with is I often do a summit where we get together once or twice a year just to understand sort of, where are we all going? Are we still going in the right direction? Anything that's new come through, we need to be aware of. I'm always floored by the ideas and the implementation that is happening. And none of that is led by me, which is fantastic, frankly.
Yeah. That's so cool. What would you say about, you touched a little bit, but what are some of the characteristics of the leadership function of a CSO that maybe help you or what are needed? So what makes a good leader in sustainability?
I think there's a couple of things. I think curiosity. I think really wanting to understand what's driving both impact, but also what drives people, really what can motivate to help support, develop careers, people, ideas into implementation. So curiosity, I think, is a critical one. It probably absolutely irritates most of my team all the time because I'm always, well, what about this? So, but anyway, I think that sort of what about, so what question is really powerful at all levels. Resilience, I think, is another one. You will never, ever be 100% sustainable. So let's understand how we can keep moving forwards, not being disheartened by sometimes, what feels sometimes like a sideways or a backwards step, but actually keep moving forwards, keep that momentum going. And how do you support the resilience, not only of yourself, but also the teams and the organizations and the structures around you as well. So I think resilience is a very key one. I think we've talked about it before, but there are ways of getting resilience, and that's working with your tribe. So the third thing I think is critical is that tribe, the network, which is what I think you do brilliantly, others do brilliantly as well. I have some peers and some people I work with and some of your other award winners who absolutely hold me up, frankly. And without that ability to have those people to turn to talk to discuss ideas, to share the pain, but also share the enthusiasm when you're having that bad day and they're able to lift you up, that is so powerful. And also a lot of ideas are coming out of just those conversations where you go, well, I think we've got the same challenge. We might be a different industry, but I think we have this, how do we solve this together? And then it isn't how do I solve it? It's how do we solve it? So I think those are my three ones: curiosity, resilience, but network. It's definitely can be quite lonely if you're trying to do this all on your own. So I would very much advise build those networks.
Awesome. So, in your speech on stage, you said that one of your toughest target groups is actually your kids, because they ask you, "Hey, mommy, what are you doing?" and so on. So, I have two questions. One is, are you teaching them about the moss on the right side? And secondly, what would you say to young people and new talent getting into, let's say, sustainability and maybe a potential choice working in corporates versus NGOs or wherever you can do impact? What is maybe an advice that you give the young Claire from 20 years ago and or young people from today? So two-part question.
My children are brilliantly curious on the topics and also extremely challenging. I love constantly they are reminding me of why we're doing this. So I'll give you an example. Literally walking to school today, we were walking behind two cars. One was electric, one was non-electric, and he called the car a smoker. And I love the terminology. I'm sure the car industry hate me. But it was a very, very, he was like, I like that car because it doesn't smoke. I like that car because it doesn't, basically hurt his lungs is what he was implying. So actually they are extremely conscious and curious and challenging. So I love that. And of course I will hugely encourage that position as well. And then I think encouraging young people, it is follow the passion. Whether that's an NGO, whether that's a corporate, whether that's a think tank or academia, you do need to follow your interest and your passion. And we do need people everywhere. So, if everybody was just in corporate sustainability, I think that would be a loss. If everybody was in academia, it would be a lot. So it does need to be across the board. But I think one of the things I've learned, definitely, probably a little bit later on in life, is you've got to really love what you do. Yes, you'll have bad days. Yes, you'll definitely have bad weeks, but you've got to enjoy the topic. You've got to enjoy the culture of the organization. You've got to enjoy what you're doing.
Fantastic. I can definitely feel the vibe and your mission and the passion that you put into your job. And thank you so much for giving us such a detailed, bouquet of initiatives and where you stand and the big challenges ahead. Congratulations again on getting the recognition you deserve, including all your teams and so on. It has been a pleasure, Claire. See you soon around. And thank you so much for being in the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Harald. I really do appreciate everything you do and bringing people together. So I really do appreciate it. Thank you.